So one thing that again informs a lot of work is this idea of intersectionality, right?
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to understand intersectionality one step at a time these days, because sometimes what happens is we always think of the intersection of say 10 things or 5 things or
Right.
6 things, and we don't land up speaking about the specific intersections, right? So for me, I've also found out that I'm often in room where even when we are being intersectionally aware, caste gets
Invisibilized.
lost in the
Yes.
conversation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And again, the burden falls on
Yes.
certain
Yes.
people only to speak about caste, right? And one thing that we used to, when we used to have our meetings outside of these 2 days, which came up, something that I had not thought out very deeply, but it came that day and it was very interesting, was how we thought that it's not to say that by addressing say Dalit trans women, so violence against Dalit trans women, by prioritizing it, it means that we are discrediting other violence or saying that this is the highest form of violence. It is only to say that when you keep in mind the most marginalized person in your mind while speaking about reforms, the others will automatically get taken care of in some sense through this process, right? And for me, so something like, for instance, in today's discussion, which I did share even in the meeting, what stood out was that we were speaking about the Madurai bench decision of an intercaste marriage between a trans woman and a cis man. And the court was actually so progressive in some way, because they are actually directing it to the relevant authorities to provide the benefits that are available for intercaste couples to flow to this couple also. And that very week, I think, if I'm not wrong, we hear of intercaste, straight couple being burnt alive. So for me, so how does caste figure in, say, something like what we're doing, queering the law, right? So how does caste queer the law?
Yeah, I think for me also, I feel like I think the queer movement has largely been accused of being exclusionary, right? I mean, from what I read in here, because I stepped into the movement much later on. And I think I see a lot of writing now going out there where they're talking about you just can't speak of LGBT. You need to also account for Dalit LGBT. You need to also account for working class LGBT. You need to account for LGBT persons who have disabilities. So I think the conversation has kind of sort of started, if I'm right. Correct me if I'm wrong if that's not the case. And I think that's also what we need to account for in the work that we're doing. I think a lot of our work does largely focus on gender and sexuality as the core identities that are being regulated by the law or being excluded by the law. But as you said, right, we're all still grasping with intersectionality, and I'm glad that we're at least aware that oppression is more multifaceted for certain persons who have multiplicity of identities as opposed to others. And I think that's something we really need to start integrating into our work, including querying the law. Because who are we querying the law for, right? Are we querying it for like an upper class gay cis man? Or are we querying it for the community at large, which has so many identities and voices? So I think that consciousness is coming. We need to now learn to how to weave that into our work a little stronger.
Yeah. It's also interesting to think about what are the limitations of the law in like dealing with these things, because like today, for instance, we spoke a lot about an anti-discrimination bill, and then there are so many critiques generally of the anti-discrimination bill, and what are the kinds of identities you can keep fitting into this framework. And I think that's exactly where I think we need to delve deeper, and we need to think a little more deeply about how do these questions inform the law, and how do we incorporate this entire, because it's a discourse in social theory, but then to translate that down into tangible benefits is another challenge. And it's not something I think that only we can take on single-handedly, and I think that's where building a movement is really important, and building coalitions with other groups are really important as well. And I think that's another prong of the project that we've started now, and we hope that it's going to be like a way to build more interconnections with other groups.
Yeah, and I
working in
think
this
not
space.
only about caste, but everything. We
But
have to
about
be
everything,
We
exactly.
should be deeply conscious of context, I think.
Yeah.
Because we often miss out on dealing with the law. We look at it in a vacuum. Like, this is the
Yeah.
law,
Yeah.
neatly, it's
Yeah.
elegant,
Yeah.
it works this way.
Yeah.
But all law is contextual. And
Yeah.
if we're not conscious of context, then we end up being ahistorical. We don't recognize why something
Yeah.
is happening. So that problem identification, as you pointed out, to which the response to that has to be contextual. We need to know what is happening. We need to know exactly why, in what context, what problems are arising. Therefore, then how can the law respond to it? Like law can't be a neat laboratory where you just are figuring out, okay, I add this, I subtract this, and this is the final answer. But it has to be like, it has to be. Yeah, it has to be messy, I guess, and it has to take into account different things. It has to take into account the past, what has happened in other places, what are the other conversations that are happening. And perhaps a way of doing that, as Deeksha said, is to build coalitions, is to have just more conversations with more different people. I think which can be tiring, but I guess one has to take that, or one has to do that as a minimum to ultimately ensure that queering the law will mean